Let's now turn to the case against the Trump Organization. On Thursday, the former president's company and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg, were both charged with fraud and tax crimes. A lawyer for the Manhattan District Attorney called the alleged actions a, quote, sweeping and audacious illegal payment scheme. Former President Trump released a statement saying the charges were part of a, quote, political witch hunt by the radical left Democrats. Not surprising, the language that he's using there. Jonathan Swan, I want to come to you. What does this mean for President Trump, his brand, and his political future?
Well, it's a complicated question because, so we need to pick it apart a little bit. On one hand, if the allegations are true, this is obviously illegal, obviously should be prosecuted. On the other hand, when you compare it to the expectations that had been set for this investigation, Trump's political opponents, many of them viewed this as quite underwhelming. Cy Vance has been working on this investigation for more than 2 years. He's had 8 years of Trump's tax returns. And we should note it's still an ongoing investigation. They've made that very clear. We don't know, this is not necessarily the final word. But if this really is the final word and it's really an indictment based on fringe benefits, tax fraud for his CFO, and Donald Trump himself doesn't get indicted, none of his children get indicted. When you compare that to the expectations, it's quite underwhelming. All that being said, these criminal indictments really affect businesses. It affects your ability to get loans. It affects your ability to partner with people. Donald Trump has a lot of debt, so it could have real impacts on his business. But as for his political fortunes, I don't know that it has a huge impact. If anything, when I talk to his aides, I get the sense that these investigations make it slightly more likely that he runs for president in 2024 for a couple of reasons. I think some of them see it as a bit of a heat shield. The idea that he is not just a former president, but potentially an active candidate gives them a sort of ability to say this is all political. And I think the other part of it is just ego and sort of revenge. And there's a sort of, goading element to it as well. So I think that's kind of how to view this situation.
And Jonathan Lemire, I want to come to you. Alan Weisselberg, there's a lot of talk of whether or not he may flip on the president. Do you have any insight into that? And any insight whether or not former President Trump faces any sort of consequences? Jonathan Swan, is hearing a lot of what I'm hearing, which is that unless President Trump is charged, he's going to feel like he won. He's going to feel like this doesn't really politically hurt him.
Well, certainly, Amish, we know that Donald Trump's not shy about claiming victory, whether or not he actually emerges as a winner in a particular moment. A couple of things here. Yes, Chief Financial Officer Alan Weisselberg, who for a long time now was seen as really a key figure in this investigation into the Trump Organization. He's the one who handled the books and sort of knew where the bodies were buried, if you will. And we have seen that many people in the Trump orbit have indeed flipped. They've chosen to become cooperators, like Michael Cohen most famously, but certainly not alone. To this point, Weisselberg hasn't. And as people I talked to today say, well, maybe that changes now. He felt handcuffs on his skin today. He was in court, and he is someone who now, not a young man, could face prison time if indeed convicted. And maybe that changes the calculation. To this point, though, there's no signs that he will. And I think that, as Jonathan said, that if that does not happen, I think there's a sense that Trump himself and his adult sons, remember Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump are those who were running the Trump Organization while their father was in office, that they would potentially escape liability themselves. And yes, damaging to the business, no doubt. But if they emerge from them by themselves unscathed, that I do think this will be spun as a win. People I've talked to indeed concur with what you guys are hearing. This might even make the former president more likely to run again and be able to say, look, this was yet another, quote, witch hunt, and they came after me, and they failed. And to gin up those grievances that he and his supporters are so often fueled, that may lead him to want to get back in the race in a couple of years.
And Ayesha, I see you nodding your head. President Trump, former President Trump, he's a survivor. He is someone who, there have been all sorts of people around him who have been charged, but he has not had to face these legal consequences. Talk about that. And is it significant at all that some of these alleged activities were happening while he was president of the United States?
Well, as everyone has said before, I don't think it's significant to President Trump because whatever comes out, he will say that this is all made up, this is not true. unless and until something happens to him or to his close family, it is not something that he is going to be overly concerned about. I do think that when it comes to the idea of him running again, some of this is kind of neither here nor there, because Trump clearly wants to be the leader of the Republican Party. He's not giving that away. If he does not run, he will not be the leader of the Republican Party. It will be whoever is running for president. And so I think in that way, when you talked about ego, I think that has to be driving much of this.
And Jonathan, Swan, when you mentioned the word ego, it stuck in my mind too. I almost feel like I want you to maybe talk to our audience a bit more about what you're hearing from your sources, your good sources in the Trump world.
So, look, a big part of what possesses Donald Trump at the moment is he wants to be relevant. So his staff are constantly printing out, that they'll show him all the news clips he's getting. So you're still in the game, here's, all the headlines you're getting, and they show him and they sit down. He does his political meetings with his team on the phone, etc. But from what I understand from talking to people around him, the thing he misses most, and it has a real psychological effect on him, is just he's not on television all the time. When he switches on TV, it's not just wall-to-wall Trump coverage. It's not wall-to-wall newspapers. I remember going in and seeing Donald Trump when he was president, going into the dining room and saying, he would watch himself on television. He would experience being covered in a sort of, the amount of pleasure he got from that was almost visceral when you were in his company. And that's got to be, the withdrawal from that drug has to be quite intense. And that's what I hear over and over again when I talk to people who are still in his orbit.
It's such a smart window into the person that all of us covered together, the former president. I remember him looking up in the sky and saying, "I'm the chosen one." You could tell that he was reveling in this idea that he was on TV and that people were talking about him, and he felt like he was the man of the moment.